So it looks like one of the most useless units in all of 40k might be somewhat usable now. Let's talk about a few tricks and shenanigans that Eldar will be able to pull off with their Webway gate. Hello and welcome back to Horseback's Tactics, where we've been covering the Games Workshop news, leaks and previews from the Eldar Codex, and today Warhammer community have given us yet another teaser, basically showing us the new rules for how the Webway gate works. I think it will be quite cool for this thing to be made somewhat usable. It hasn't really ever been good to my knowledge, which is kind of a shame as it really is quite an iconic Eldar thing. They've been in the lore for ages, you could build them in computer games like Dawn of War, and as it goes model wise it's really quite a spectacle on the tabletop, as you can see here standing massively taller than a Wraith Knight. Currently its rules are absolutely terrible, I'd argue perhaps one of the worst units in all of 40k right now, but as with just about every unit in 9th edition, Games Workshop does seem to be going through and trying to make it fit into the army in some way, with a few fun new rules. It does seem like it's temporarily out of stock online at the moment, but at least it's not being canned from the codex like the Genestealer Cult Tectonic Frag Drill. It would have been a shame for such a cool model. So currently, as I mentioned, it's really not a good unit in current 9th edition 40k. At the moment it's a 95 point fortification for the Eldar. Its only real asset is being very tough, 14 wounds at toughness 8, a 3+ save and a 5+ invul. It does mean most of the time it's not going to be very efficient to take out, but if your opponent has got spare anti-tank going, then they still can. It can forward deploy somewhere towards the enemy if needed, though being a mobile with no damage output does mean that the enemy can just charge the thing and then not be able to be shot by the rest of your army, so it could actually give them tactical advantages in some cases. Obviously the main point of it is to try and deploy your Eldar from reserve to get the alpha strike on the enemy, but the main issue with that is that if the enemy gets too close to the Webway gate, then you're not even allowed to bring the models out of the gate, as you're not allowed to deploy them anywhere that's within 9 inches of enemy models. When you could spend command points to put units either in strategic reserve or use the Webway, it just really makes putting the 95 point investment for this thing seem like a really bad idea, particularly with the fortification rules like not being able to deploy exactly where you want to, needing to be greater than 3 inches from terrain at all times. There had already been a few rumours out and about for the Webway gate. It's rumoured to cost 80 points in the new codex. That's most likely the playtester codex points, but it seems kind of believable. Already that's down 15 points, which is a good start. And it was also rumoured to be unkillable as well, becoming one of those fortifications that you treat as battlefield terrain, and not a fortification unit that the enemy can directly attack and destroy. That latter part does seem to be basically confirmed, to be honest, based on the following rules that Games Workshop have unveiled. Games Workshop have shown off a trio of rules for the gate today. First up is a rule called Mysterious Appearance, which appears to be its setup rules and its terrain tags. It can be set up kind of similar to things like the Death Guard's Miasmic Malignifier, a forward deployment rule that's greater than 12 inches away from the enemy deployment zone and units. The Wraithbone archers must be set up within 3 inches of each other, though weirdly it doesn't really specify exactly how you have to set them up, so I guess if you're really trying to cheese it to the max, you could set them up in all sorts of weird configurations if there wasn't really enough space for it. And then when they are deployed, each Wraithbone arch is treated as an obstacle terrain feature with the following traits: light cover, heavy cover, unstable position, and inspiring to Eldari. Forward deployment does seem like it's the major advantage of this. Now it seems that it's actually going to be better at delivering reinforcements into the fray. It genuinely could be quite powerful to put down some reinforcements right in the centre of the board, and hopefully in good strike range of the enemy army. The main issue is whether or not you're going to have enough space to deploy it with its quite big footprint. Again, it'll still be falling foul of that greater than 3 inches from terrain pieces rule. Previously, it didn't give cover to any nearby units, so that's kind of a benefit as well. Previously it was a fortification unit, so that wasn't relevant at all. Kind of handy to still give light cover to any Eldar sheltering just behind it. Could make them a little bit tougher against ranged attacks. I think the inspiring thing is quite a nice little touch as well. +1 leadership is rarely going to make too much difference, but it sounds like that'll apply to anything that you put out of strategic reserve here, so if they do take a few more casualties, they're just a tiny bit less likely to lose further models to morale. Next up, it gives you a benefit that applies to the entire army called Webway Travellers. This basically allows you to halve the cost of putting units in strategic reserve, and interestingly enough you round fractions down, not up, so if you only had one unit in strategic reserve that would cost you 1 CP, then I believe that will be free. Kind of handy if you do want to make some fairly heavy use of this rule, even if not all of them are necessarily coming in via the Webway gate. Seems like it could be pretty handy if you need to keep some really big hitters safe, say you've got a Wraith Knight or two. Maybe there's nowhere good to hide them on the board due to towering over the obscuring terrain. This could be a way to get them in turn 2 and ensure the alpha strike rather than the other way round. It's a bit more of an option when it no longer costs masses and masses of CP. Finally though, and the real reason that you'd want to bring this, is this Webway strike rule. Each time one of your Eldari units arrives from strategic reserve, I believe that would include Drukhari as well, you can set it up anywhere on the battlefield that's wholly within 6 inches of both of the Wraithbone arches of a friendly Webway gate. If you do so, then the Eldari unit can be set up within 9 inches of enemy models. It doesn't have to be outside that anymore, and it can also be set up in engagement range of enemy models as well. And then, like with regular strategic reserve, if you do choose to set up in engagement range, it counts as having charged, and it is able to make attacks to the unit that you put it in base with. Basically, it kind of makes the Webway gate into a bit of an area denial tool, knowing that if your opponent puts models too close to it, they're likely going to be ambushed in some force by powerful Eldar emerging from the Webway. Seems really solid if you could put this down somewhere near an objective. It means that opponents would have to be really tentative as to how close they get. A lot of the Eldar aspect warriors tend to be very fragile but very hard hitting. You wouldn't want to be putting anything too valuable too close if you knew that next turn the Eldar player could just put down some fire dragons or striking scorpions or something and either shoot or charge your unit off the board. I think maybe the most restrictive thing is that it has to be within 6 inches of both the arches, not just one of them. So that means there's going to be a reasonably small field of overlap between the two, putting it down like where this Wraith Knight is in the picture of the Webway gates rather than just outside them or anything. Seems kind of fluffy that, though I guess maybe it increases the incentive to put them down in some sort of weird configuration and maybe gain yourself a bit more of a deployment area, as you would get a bit more space if you put the two arches really close together. Perhaps kind of seems a bit silly that you're incentivized to do that if people are trying to get the maximum value out of them. So overall, they do look kind of interesting. The main issue with fortifications though is that 3-inch deployment rule outside of other terrain bits. As you can see, for the size of them compared with this super heavy, these arches do have really quite a large footprint, even if it's quite thin. I think on a lot of set terrain maps, you might really struggle for anywhere to put them down that's meaningful. I guess at least if you want them in your deployment zone, you could trade out another piece of terrain for them. Provided you can get a unit to somewhere within threat range of an objective, they still might be useful. So I'll be interested to hear what your guys' take on this. Will they be useful at 80 points, or still just a bit too clunky in how they bring in reserves to actually make them worth including? I have a feeling that the Great Big Webway Gate might just remain a bit niche, but at least it's ridiculously better than it was before. It was a really badly thought out datasheet in its previous incarnation. If you've enjoyed the video, feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, or I'll certainly keep the regular videos coming. I'm sure we'll have plenty more for the Eldar before the codex drops, and I'll certainly review the codex in full when we have full details. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page, and you can find that down in the video description below. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with the chance to win some really big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.